I treated her injured arm once. Now she follows me around every day." The arm was the first thing he noticed. Not because it was injured, he would notice that second, but because she was holding it at an angle that made no mechanical sense. The joint bent inward at a degree that suggested either a bone structure he hadn't encountered yet, or a level of pain management so disciplined it had rerouted her entire posture into something that looked, at a glance, like she was simply resting one arm across her chest. Like a gesture, like habit. Eli Marsh had been running the Carthen Station dispensary for 14 months, and in that time, he had learned to read the way people held their bodies when they were hurt and didn't want to show it. She was very, very hurt. He was between patients, a Drevathi dockworker with a hand laceration he'd sealed 20 minutes ago, and a scheduled consult with a Marin colonist he had another 40 minutes before, and the queue board showed no one. The dispensary on level 4 of Carthen Station was not a hospital. It was a walk-in triage and treatment bay for non-critical injuries, staffed by one human medical technician on a rotating contract, supplied through a joint colony provisioning agreement that consistently ran 2 weeks behind on topical analgesics, and located between a pressure suit resale outlet and a food vendor whose primary product was a fermented grain paste that smelled, in Eli's opinion, exactly like what it probably was. He had come to think of it as home. She was standing in the corridor just past the entry threshold, not inside, not quite outside, occupying the exact border between the two with the careful precision of someone who had not yet committed to a decision. Tall, lean in the way that suggested a body built for a different gravity. Skin the deep copper green of old oxidized bronze, pulled smooth over high, wide cheekbones and a jaw that came to a gentle point. Her hair was the color of weathered slate, cropped close on the sides and left long on top, and it fell forward over the side of her face in a way that might have been style and might have been instinct, covering the side that was hurting. The arm she was protecting was her left. Her eyes, when they tracked to him, were pale amber, almost yellow, with horizontal pupils like a goat's. She held his gaze for a flat 2 seconds and then looked at the wall just past his left ear in a manner that communicated, clearly and without rudeness, that she was assessing the space rather than looking away. "Walk in," he said. She didn't answer. She looked at the queue board, then at the treatment bay behind him, then at the sealed supply cabinet on the east wall. She was reading the room. "I'm the only one here," Eli said. "No, wait, you can come in." Another 2 seconds. Then she stepped across the threshold with the careful deliberateness of someone who had made a decision they were not entirely comfortable with, and sat down on the treatment bench when he gestured to it. "Arm," he said. She looked at him. "Left arm. You've been holding it at about 30 degrees of internal rotation since you came into my sight line. That's usually a fracture or a bad sprain." She considered this. "Neither," she said. Her standard was precise and slightly formal, the kind learned from a text source rather than a speaking one. "I have a—" She paused, and he recognized the pause as someone searching for a word in a second language, not someone being evasive. "A tear, in the inner tissue." "Soft tissue tear, muscle or tendon?" "The connective." She moved her fingers slightly toward the inner elbow. "Here." "Can I look?" She hesitated. "I'll tell you what I'm doing before I do it," he said. "You can stop me at any point." The hesitation resolved into something that wasn't quite a nod, a slight tilt of her chin, a fractional lowering of her head, which he would later learn was a Vithani affirmative and carried more weight than a nod did. He pulled on gloves and turned on the diagnostic light. She wore a short-sleeved work tunic in the gray-blue of station maintenance crew, and when he gently took her left wrist to extend the arm, he could see the injury site clearly, a raised ridge of what would, in a human patient, have looked like a bruise, but in her read as a darker band of copper green that had gone almost black at the center. The inner elbow, the connective tissue that ran along the inside of the joint, was visibly swollen. How long? He said. 3 days. He looked at her. I was going to see if it healed, she said, without particular defensiveness. Just a statement of a decision that had not worked out. Did your people's medicine teach you that soft tissue tears heal on their own with rest? Yes. They usually do, he said, but this one's pulled. The tissue's retracted. He kept his touch light, following the ridge with one finger, feeling the tension in the surrounding area. If it retracts further, it won't reconnect cleanly. You'll have reduced flexion in that joint permanently. She was very still. I can fix it, he said. It's not surgical. I have a compound. I'll need to know if your biology is compatible. I'll need 2 minutes to check against the Vithani reference index. That encourages the tissue to re-extend and bond. 3 applications over 3 days, then a week of light use, and it'll be as close to full recovery as I can give you in a dispensary. She looked at the supply cabinet. You have Vithani reference data. I have reference data for 62 species. 63 if you count the classification revision for Marin subspecies, which I do. He let go of her wrist gently. 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere. He pulled the index on his tablet, found the Vithani musculoskeletal data, extensive, Vithani being a significant fraction of the station's maintenance and engineering crew, and cross-referenced the compound. Green across the board. Compatible, he said, coming back. The compound's going to feel warm when I apply it. That's normal. I'll apply it along the injury line, hold light pressure for about 90 seconds, and then wrap it. You'll need to come back tomorrow, and the day after for the next 2 applications. I can return tomorrow. Good. He prepared the compound, a pale blue gel that smelled faintly of something he had never been able to identify, like stone after rain, and applied it along the injury site in a careful line, then held the wrap of his 2 fingers along it with exactly the pressure the protocol required. She made no sound. She watched his hands with the same careful reading the room attention she'd turned on the dispensary when she first walked in. What's your name? He asked. Not because he needed it for the record. Walk-in triage records were logged by species and injury type, not individual name, but because it was easier to work with someone when you knew what to call them. She looked at him, and this time she held his gaze rather than the wall behind him. Sethara, she said. Sethara Velon. Eli Marsh. He kept the pressure steady. What happened to it? I was moving a pressure manifold coupling, she said. The secondary latch released without warning. I caught the weight, a pause, with the wrong part of my arm. Ouch. The corners of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something that acknowledged the word as appropriate. Yes, she said, that is the correct description. He finished the application, wrapped the joint in a breathable pressure bandage, and gave her a brief sheet on what to watch for. She read the sheet with the same thoroughness she had given everything else. He suspected she was not a person who skimmed, and then folded it into the pocket of her work tunic. Tomorrow, he said, same time if you can. The compound works best applied at consistent intervals. She gave him the chin tilt again. Tomorrow, she confirmed and stood and left. He thought briefly that she seemed like a straightforward patient. He went back to his consult prep and did not think about her again until he noticed, that evening while updating his intake log, that he had written patient, Vithani, female, soft tissue tier, inner elbow L, and then sat for a moment before adding the supplementary note about the degree of retraction and the choice of compound, which was something he did for patients whose cases he expected to remember. He was not always sure why he noted some things and not others. He noted this one. She came back the next day, and the day after. Both visits were professional, brief, and identical in structure. She sat down. He applied the second and then third doses of the compound. He checked the injury site. She read the instruction sheet for that application with the same thoroughness she'd given the first. She gave him the chin tilt and left. On the third day, he told her the treatment was complete and the arm would continue healing over the following week. Light use, he reminded her. No lifting the equivalent of an unsecured pressure manifold coupling. I'll note that, she said, and this time the corners of her mouth definitely moved. Come back in a week if it hasn't resolved, or immediately if you feel the tensioning sensation again. I will, she said. She left. He did not expect to see her again. Walk-ins rarely returned unless something was wrong. Carthen Station had 12,000 inhabitants spread across 11 levels and a docking ring with a permanent population of another 3,000. The odds of the same person appearing in his door were genuinely low. On the fifth day, she appeared in his door. Not as a patient. She wasn't holding her arm wrong. She stood at the threshold with the same threshold-occupying deliberateness she'd had the first time, and she was carrying a container. He was between patients again. The Carthen Station dispensary ran at an irregular pace, 40 minutes of nothing, then 3 people at once, then nothing again for an hour, and he was in one of the nothings, working through a backlog of index updates that he kept meaning to complete and kept being interrupted away from. Is the arm, he started. The arm is well. She entered, set the container on the edge of the treatment bench and opened it. Inside were 2 sealed cups of something that steamed faintly. This is cassava from level 3. The Vathani vendor there makes it correctly. A slight emphasis on asterisk correctly that suggested the vendor on level 7, the one closer to him, did not. It is customary, she said, when someone has restored function to you, to bring them something. He looked at the cups. He looked at her. You didn't have to do that, he said. No, she agreed. I wanted to. She left 1 cup on the bench, kept the other. He noticed this only after that she had not brought 1 cup for him and left, but 2, and stayed to drink hers and stood near the east wall while he picked up his cup. There was a particular quality to the way she occupied the space. Not intruding, not tentative, just present, like something that had found its natural position. He drank. The cassava was excellent, warm and slightly bitter with an aftertaste of something sweet that arrived about 4 seconds after the first sip, like an apology from the bitterness. And they stood in the treatment bay in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which he noted because silences with people he just met were usually at least slightly uncomfortable. She finished her cup before he did, replaced the lid on the container, and gave him the chin tilt. I hope the arm continues to recover well, he said. It will, she said, with the same uncomplicated certainty she brought to most things, and left. He stood with his cup and thought briefly that she seemed like an unusually direct person in a way he found restful. Then he finished his cassava and went back to the index updates. 3 days later, she appeared in his door again. This time she had a question about an analgesic she'd been given by the station's pharmacy on level 7. She held up the label, which Eli could see from across the room was, in fact, a Dravathi formulation. The pharmacist said it was close enough, she said. There was something in her voice that indicated she had already known the pharmacist was wrong and had wanted a second opinion before she said so. It's not, Eli said. I thought it wasn't. She pocketed the tube. What should I ask for instead? He told her. She listened with the careful thoroughness she brought to instruction sheets, asked one precise clarifying question about the dosing interval, confirmed she understood, and left. 2 days after that, she came with a Vathani colleague, a younger man with the same copper-green skin in a lighter shade and the manner of someone who had been brought somewhere against his will, who had a minor hand burn from a plasma coupling malfunction. She waited by the door while Eli treated it, and when the colleague left she remained. He wouldn't have come on his own, she said. I guessed. He thinks station medical is for emergencies. He has a Vathani traditionalist view about self-repair. A lot of maintenance crew does, Eli said. He was cleaning the treatment bench. It's partly cultural and partly practical. They work in a field where tools break and you fix them and you move on, and that logic migrates to bodies. Yes, she said, I had it before my arm, a pause. I had it less after. He looked up. She was watching him with the amber eyes, straightforward and thoughtful. I'm glad you came in, he said. She gave him the chin tilt. As am I, she said, and left. He began to notice a pattern after that. Not immediately. It took about 2 weeks, and the visits were spaced enough that no single one felt like anything other than a reasonable reason to stop by. She came with a question about a Vithani supplement that was sold on the station and whether it was compatible with the compound he'd used. He checked. It was, but only at half the listed dose for anyone who'd recently had the compound. She thanked him with the specific quality of attention that meant she would remember the exact information and would act on it. She came to drop off a technical note she'd found in the station's maintenance database that referenced an older version of the Vithani musculoskeletal index, and thought he might want to update his records. He did. It changed 3 reference values he'd been working from. She came to ask if he knew which vendor on the docking ring sold the antiseptic grade she needed for a small cut, not serious, on her right hand. She'd already treated it. She just wanted the correct grade for follow-up care. She'd been given 3 conflicting answers. He told her. She left. She came back 4 days later, not with a question or a thing, but to inform him that the antiseptic had worked and that the cut was healing. He noticed, absently, that he did not find this strange. He told her he was glad and meant it, and she gave him the chin tilt and left. She came the day after that with a container of something from the level 3 vendor, not cassava this time, but a cold preparation with fruit in it, because, she said, she had noticed it was warm in the dispensary, and the temperature regulation on level 4 had been running 3 degrees above set point since the previous week, which she knew because she was the one who had filed the maintenance report about it. He hadn't known the temperature was miscalibrated. He'd just been warm. He was beginning to understand that she noticed things. It was around the 4th week that Priya noticed. Priya Nadal was the Marin colony liaison whose office was 2 corridors over and who had become, in the way that happened in small contained spaces like space stations, someone Eli had lunch with on most Tuesdays. She appeared in his dispensary on a Tuesday that was not a lunch day, and leaned in the doorframe with the expression of someone who has walked past something interesting and has decided to investigate. Eli, she said, I just passed a Vithani woman in the corridor outside. That's likely, he said. About 1/3 of the engineering crew is Vithani. She was walking slowly, Priya said, toward this direction. He shrugged. She's a patient. She had a container with her. She sometimes brings things, he said, and then heard himself say it and paused. Priya's expression had the quality of someone who had just had a private theory confirmed. She sometimes brings things. It's a cultural thing, Eli said. Vithani custom when someone restores function. I treated her arm. About a month ago. Yes. And she's been in how many times since then? He thought about it. He counted, which took longer than he expected because the visits had not felt like a count at the time, they had felt like encounters. Several, he said. She has questions. What kind of questions? Medical, supply-related. She had a question about a supplement interaction. She brought a colleague who needed treatment. He paused. She told me when the cut on her hand healed. Priya looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when she believed she understood a situation better than the person she was talking to. She used it rarely, and she was usually right. Eli, she said gently, how much do you know about Vithani social customs? Enough to treat them medically, he said. How about non-medically? He did not answer. I have a colony liaison's guide, she said. Chapter 6 is on the Vithani. I will send it to you. She sent it that evening. He read Chapter 6. Then he read it again. The Vithani were, the guide explained, a species with a social structure built on networks of *kathva, a word that translated imprecisely as demonstrated worth or earned regard. Where many species expressed gratitude as a single transaction, a gift, a thank you, a returned favor, the Vithani relationship with *kathva* was ongoing. When someone demonstrated worth to a Vithani individual in a meaningful way, particularly by restoring something that had been lost or damaged, particularly when the act required skill and commitment rather than circumstance, the Vithani individual entered a state the guide called *velkoth*, which it translated as witnessed or seen. The person who had demonstrated the worth had been *witnessed by them. And the Vithani response to being witnessed was not to discharge the feeling with a single reciprocation, but to maintain proximity. The Vithani expression of gratitude and regard, the guide said, is iterative rather than transactional. A gift is the beginning of an acknowledgement, not the end of it. The individual being thanked should expect continued contact, visits, small offerings, the sharing of useful information, as an ongoing demonstration that the act of worth is held and remembered. This is not obligation or debt in the human sense. It is closer to what humans might call devotion, expressed through attention. The Vithani do not follow those they are indebted to. They follow those they have witnessed. He set the tablet down. He picked it up again and read the next paragraph. It should be noted that Velkoth carries no coercive expectation. The Vithani who witnesses is not demanding a relationship. They are acknowledging one they believe already exists by virtue of the act that created it. The witnessed individual may receive this acknowledgement or decline it. If declined, the Vithani will withdraw without grievance, as the act of worth stands regardless of its continuation. If received, even implicitly, as through continued interaction and welcome, the Velkoth deepens. Over time, Velkoth between adults may develop into what the Vithani call Kethvel, which is more precisely translated as a bond of lasting regard. He thought about Kethzava, about the supplement question, about the technical note she'd brought for his records, about the fruit preparation because the temperature on level 4 was 3 degrees above setpoint, and she had known because she'd filed the maintenance report. He thought about the way she stood at his threshold every time, never assuming entry, always waiting. He thought about the fact that he had, in fact, welcomed her every time, not as an obligation, not even as a courtesy, as something he had found without particularly deciding to, that he was glad about. He put the tablet down again and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he went to his cue board and confirmed, as he had half expected, that he had a window free the following afternoon. She came the next morning, not the afternoon. She didn't have advance notice of his schedule, he realized. She was working around her own shifts, and she was carrying a small wrapped package that turned out, when she set it on the treatment bench, to contain a repair tool he'd mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago that he'd been trying to source through the station supply chain without success. A calibration stylus for his diagnostic scanner, compatible with his model, which had been discontinued by the manufacturer and was genuinely difficult to find. She set it down with the same matter-of-fact directness she brought to everything. The maintenance depot on level 9 had a parts exchange last week, she said. I recognized the model number from your equipment. He looked at the stylus, he looked at her. Sithara, he said. She met his eyes with the amber-yellow gaze, horizontal pupils still faintly unnerving to him and now, simultaneously, very familiar. I read the liaison guide, he said, chapter 6. A silence, not uncomfortable. Her silences were never uncomfortable, they were just silences, thoughtful and undefensive. I see, she said. I want to make sure I understand what's happening, he said. Not because he paused, because he wanted to say this precisely. Not because I'm unwelcome to it. I just want to understand it correctly, and I didn't want you to be in a situation where you thought I understood more than I did. She considered this for a moment. What did the guide tell you? That you witnessed me, he said, when I treated your arm. Yes. And that you've been, he found the word he was looking for, maintaining proximity. Yes. Is that accurate from your perspective, or is the guide simplified? She tilted her head slightly. The slate-gray hair shifted. The guide is not wrong, she said. It is. She made a small gesture that seemed to acknowledge the limitations of second-hand cultural translation. It reduces something that is gradual into something that sounds more decided than it is. At the beginning, when I brought the Kethsava, it was custom. That is true. A pause. After that, it was not only custom. He waited, because he had learned that she used pauses not as hesitations, but as spaces in which she finished the thought before she said it. You explained what you were doing before you did it, she said. When you treated the arm, you said I could stop you at any point. She looked at the calibration stylus on the bench, not looking away from him so much as locating something concrete to describe. Most people do not think to say that. Even people who are competent, even people who are kind, they treat the patient as another pause, as a problem to be resolved. You treated me as a person who was also experiencing a problem. He didn't say anything, because it didn't seem like the moment for an answer. I notice things like that, she said. I have learned to be precise about what I value, because not all things that look like consideration are consideration. Some of them are performance. Her eyes came back to his. Yours was not performance. I try not to be, he said. I'm not always successful. I know, she said. I've been watching for 4 weeks. The directness of it was so unadorned that it landed before he could prepare for it, and he found that he was, surprisingly, given that the sentence was essentially I have been observing you and assessing you for a month, not alarmed by it at all. How am I doing? He said. The corners of her mouth moved, and this time it was unambiguously a smile, brief and precise and genuine. Well, she said. He nodded. He reached out and picked up the calibration stylus. This was difficult to find, he said. Thank you. You're welcome, she stood. I have a shift at 1400. I have a consult at 1500. He hesitated then. I usually take lunch at 1300. Level 3, the place near the junction, if you're free before your shift. She looked at him with the amber eyes, considered. Level 3 has the Kethsava vendor who makes it correctly, she said. That's why I mentioned Level 3. Another pause, this one shorter. I'll be there, she said. She gave him the chin tilt and walked to the door. Sithara, he said. She stopped. I'm glad you came in, he said. The first time. She stood in the doorway for a moment with her back to him, and when she turned her head, just slightly, the copper green of her profile against the corridor light was precise and clear. So am I, she said and left. She was at the Level 3 junction at 12:58. He was at 12:57 because he was, as a general rule, a person who arrived slightly early, and he had the impression she might be also. He was correct. She was already standing at the outer edge of the vendor row, reading the overhead menu of the Kethsava stall with the same thoroughness she read instruction sheets, and she glanced at him when he arrived with an expression he was beginning to be able to read, the particular quality of composed attention that, in her, indicated something she might have called pleased. She ordered without consulting him, which he suspected was because she already knew what she was getting and didn't need to discuss it. And then she paused and looked at him with a slight question in it. And for you? That he found he could read as clearly as if she'd spoken. Same as yours, he said. She ordered 2. They carried the cups to a bench at the edge of the junction, in the corridor space between the vendor row and the access to the lower maintenance shafts, which was not a beautiful spot, but had the virtue of being largely unoccupied on the midday shift. Somewhere from the direction of the food vendors came the smell of the fermented grain paste, which Eli had stopped noticing months ago. You've been on the station 14 months, she said after the first sip. A statement, not a question. You did your research. Yes, she said it without apology. You came from a trauma unit on Helen 6. I did. Why a dispensary? It was a good question, and she asked it without the particular weight people sometimes put on it, the implication that he had either failed at something larger or was recovering from something large. She asked it the way she asked everything, as though she genuinely wanted to know and would take the answer at face value. I wanted to work at a pace where I could do each thing well, he said. Trauma is, he thought about how to say it. It's excellent work, important work. I learned more in 3 years there than in the 7 before it, but there's a speed at which you begin to see people as cases, and I noticed I was beginning to do that. He looked at the cup in his hands. I wanted to go somewhere where I could take the extra 2 minutes to explain what I was doing before I did it. She was quiet for a moment. That is the most honest answer to that question I have heard, she said. Most people say something about a change of pace. That's also true, he said. It's just not the whole answer. I prefer whole answers. I've noticed. She looked at him again with the pleased quality. I was a structural engineer on the Vithani home colony for 12 years, she said, in a tone that suggested she was reciprocating in kind. I transferred to station work because, she paused in the same way he'd paused, choosing precision over ease. Because I was good at the work and I knew exactly what I was doing, and I found that I valued novelty more than stability, and the Vithani home colony is, by design, extremely stable. So you came to a station, run on a joint colony provisioning agreement, that's consistently 2 weeks behind on supplies. It is never boring, she said. No, he agreed, it isn't. They drank their cassava. The bittersweet wave arrived 4 seconds after each sip, unchanged. Around them, the junction moved. A Dravathi crew rotation heading toward the maintenance shafts, a pair of Marin colonists with cargo, the steady ambient noise of a station that ran on 3 shifts and never fully slept. How long have you been on the station? He asked. 8 months, she said. I came from a transit hub position on Velen 4, before that the home colony. This is the 3rd station I've worked. She looked at the cup in her hands with the particular thoughtful quality she had when she was assessing something she hadn't fully articulated yet. Each one is different in the ways that matter. The infrastructure is the same coupling systems, same pressure ratings, same failure modes, but the people are different. The way the people arrange themselves is different. What they need from each other. What does this station need? She considered. It needs people who don't assume they already understand the others, she said. It has 11 species in a permanent population. Most of them have been here long enough that they've stopped asking questions and started assuming. That is, she tilted her head. That is when problems begin, in maintenance and elsewhere. Is that why you checked the analgesic instead of just using it? Yes, she looked at him. And it is why I came to your dispensary instead of the level 7 pharmacy for my arm. I had heard from a colleague that you were thorough, that you checked before you acted. He was quiet for a moment. Who's the colleague? Dravathi, dock worker. He had a hand laceration last month. He remembered. The man who'd been treated 20 minutes before she first appeared. He said you sealed the laceration, and then asked if he had any nerve sensitivity in that hand, and spent 4 additional minutes confirming it hadn't been affected, she said. He said most medical staff would have sealed it and moved on. He had a slight numbness in 2 fingers, Eli said. I wanted to make sure it resolved before he left. It did resolve. Yes. He said, she continued, that you also noticed his left shoulder was sitting higher than his right and asked if he'd been compensating for something, and that you were correct that he had been, and that you told him to come back if it worsened. She paused. He hadn't planned to mention the shoulder. I saw him carrying the weight of the conversation on one side, Eli said. It's usually worth asking. She looked at him for a moment with the amber eyes. That, she said, is why I came to your dispensary. He thought about this. He thought about the dock worker, who he hadn't known had passed on anything about him, and about the way things moved on a station. The way reputation and information traveled through the corridors between shifts and vendor stops and crew lounges, building a picture of a place and the people in it that was more accurate, usually, than anything official. I'm glad you heard something useful, he said. So am I, she said. And the quality of it, the slight warmth in it, the same thing that had been in asterisk so am I in the doorway, landed in the same place the earlier one had. They finished the cassava. She had to be at her shift in 40 minutes. He had a walk-in queue that had logged 2 new additions while they sat. They stood and returned the cups and stood for a moment in the junction with the comfortable, slightly awkward quality of a thing that had been said and needed a moment to exist before anything else happened. Tomorrow, she said, I'm on an early shift. I have a window at 1100. I have a window at 1100, he said. She gave him the chin tilt. He nodded. She left toward the maintenance access shafts with the same deliberate walk she brought to everything, and he stood in the junction for a moment longer, and then went back toward level 4 with the feeling of a person who has correctly named something that had been present but unnamed. The weeks that followed had a shape to them that he recognized, gradually, as something he hadn't had in a long time, a rhythm that included another person. She came to the dispensary on the days they hadn't arranged to meet, sometimes with questions, sometimes with things. A fruit from a Dravathi vendor on level 8 that she thought he might find interesting, which he did. It tasted like citrus and grief, which he told her, and which produced the brief, precise smile. A note about a translation error in the Vathani index entry for joint tissue that he flagged and corrected. A length of cable she'd pulled from decommissioned equipment that happened to be compatible with the older power coupling on his scanner, and which solved a problem he'd been working around for 6 weeks. He brought her things too, after a while. A calibration protocol he'd written for the Vathani diagnostic parameters that he thought the maintenance crew would find useful, which she forwarded to her section chief, and which was, apparently, adopted. Coffee, once, in the form of a single cup from the level 2 vendor who sourced actual Earth origin beans and charged accordingly. On the morning she had a complicated incident report to file, and had mentioned she found reports easier with something warm to hold. The incident report was about a secondary latch failure on a pressure manifold coupling. A different one, she said when she told him. Glad to hear it, he said. She came and went from his threshold with the same care she'd always had about it. She never entered without a reason, never stayed past the point where the visit was its own thing. And he found that he had, without quite deciding to, arranged his own movements to cross hers. He went to level 3 more often than he had before. He took the longer route back from upper-level consults when his schedule allowed it, the route that passed through the maintenance section's outer corridor rather than the direct lift, because the longer route was quieter, and because he liked the quieter routes and not only, because it happened to pass the junction where her shift rotation ended. When their paths crossed there, it was 10 or 15 minutes he hadn't expected, conversations that happened in motion with no particular destination, and he had come to value the things he hadn't expected more than the things he had planned. She noticed. She did not say anything about it for a while, but one morning when he arrived at the junction, and she was already there, finishing a handoff with a colleague from the maintenance section, she looked at him after the colleague left with the particular quality of composed attention that he had learned meant she was about to say something precise. You take the long route back from the upper consults, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a moment with the amber eyes. I also take the long route, she said. From the maintenance section to the crew lounge, there are 2 ways. I take the one through the outer corridor. He was quiet. Since about 4 weeks ago, she added. He thought about this. Two people who had independently started taking longer routes that happened to converge at the same junction. He thought about shared assumption and how it was invisible from inside, and about the alternative, which was saying the thing. Would you like to take the long route at the same time? He said, deliberately. She gave him the brief, precise smile. Yes, she said, I would. She had a habit, he noticed, of describing things accurately rather than approximately. When something was 31% complete, it was 31%, not a third. When a meeting had lasted 44 minutes, it was 44, not about 45. He mentioned this once and she considered it and said that she had found in engineering that the difference between approximate and accurate was usually where the problems lived, and the habit had migrated. He understood this. He had a similar habit with injury assessments. A bruise was always described by its exact dimensions in his notes, not moderate or significant, because moderate and significant meant different things in different contexts, and he had learned to be suspicious of words that relied on shared assumption. That's what goes wrong between species, she said when he explained this. Shared assumption. Every species has them, and they're invisible from inside. Is that why you checked the analgesic, he said, instead of just taking it? She gave him a look that was both amused and considering. You already asked that question, she said. I know, I wanted to see if the answer was the same. It is, she said. With one addition, I also checked it because I had a recent experience of what correct treatment feels like, and I had recalibrated my standards accordingly. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what happened to the Vithani traditionalist view about self-repair? Yes, she said, that also. Priya, on the following Tuesday, did not say anything about it directly. She asked about his dispensary numbers and about the provisioning delay and about a Marin colonist she was concerned about and who she was going to recommend see him. She was, in the way of good friends who have already said what they had to say and are now simply present, entirely normal. At the end of lunch, she said, with the careful care of someone who genuinely wanted to know and didn't need to make a point of it, "Are you all right?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said, and that was that. The arm came up again 6 weeks later, not as an injury but as a question. They were on the docking ring observation level, not an arranged meeting, one of the cross-paths ones. She'd been finishing a maintenance inspection, and he'd been walking the long way back from a consult on the upper level. And they'd ended up at the outer rail looking at the view, which was considerable. Carthen's gas giant visible at the angle that showed its ring plane, a shuttle moving out from Bay 7, the far point of light that was the nearest inhabited system. "Does it ever bother you?" she said, "the arm?" He glanced at her. "Does what bother me?" That it was a small thing. She was watching the shuttle. What you did, relative to the things you've done, trauma unit, you treated emergencies. This was a soft tissue tier in a walk-in dispensary. He thought about this. "No," he said, "small things can still be the right things to do at the right time." She was quiet. "Why?" he said. "I sometimes think," she said, "that the asterisk Velkoth must seem," she paused, "disproportionate to someone outside the custom, that I noticed what I noticed and responded the way I responded, and that from outside it looks like." She made a gesture he had learned meant asterisk a larger thing than the situation seems to warrant asterisk. "Does it matter?" he said. She looked at him. "Whether it looks proportionate from outside," he said. "You were hurting, you came in. I treated it the way I try to treat everyone, which is as a person who is also hurting rather than a problem to solve. You noticed that. It mattered to you for the reasons it mattered to you. That seems," he searched for the word, "self-contained as a thing that happened." She looked back at the view. "You told me," he said, "that you noticed I was genuine, not performing. That's what the asterisk Velkoth asterisk is about, isn't it? Not the specific act, but what the act evidenced. Yes, she said. Then it's not disproportionate. The act was small. What it evidenced wasn't. The gas giant turned in its long, slow rotation. The shuttle had cleared the docking ring and was moving out toward the transit lane. She was standing close enough to him at the rail that he could feel, faintly, the warmth of her in the cool air of the observation level, which ran cold because the view-facing panels ran cold, which Eli minded less than he had before. She was quiet for a while, and he had learned to be comfortable in her quiet, which was a different thing from being comfortable in silence generally. Her quiet had a texture to it, thoughtful, not empty, and he had found in the weeks of knowing her that he had begun to quiet similarly when they were together, letting thoughts arrive and take shape before speaking them rather than filling the space. "I want to say something," she said. "Say it." "The asterisk keth vel asterisk," she said. The guide would have described it as what happens next after velkoth asterisk if it's received and maintained. She kept her eyes on the view. "I'm not declaring it. That is not what I'm doing. I'm telling you it's what I'm thinking about." He considered this. He knew the word from the guide, bond of lasting regard. He knew it was not a casual thing from Chapter 6. "I'm thinking about it too," he said. "I didn't have a word for it until the guide, but I've been thinking about it." She turned to look at him then, and the amber-yellow eyes in the light from the gas giant had a warmth in them he knew well now and still found, every time, worth stopping for. "That's enough," she said, "for now, that it's something we're both thinking about." "Yes," he said, "that's enough." They stood at the rail for a while in the cold observation-level air, not quite touching, both looking at the view, which was, as it consistently was from this station on this ring at this angle to the gas giant, very good. The routine did not change so much as it deepened. She still appeared at his threshold with reasons. She always had reasons. She was not a person who manufactured excuses, which he had come to appreciate profoundly. But the reasons were, over time, both more and less necessary. She brought him a Vithani text on injury recovery methodology that she'd sourced from the colony library, physical copy, because it predated digitization, and the translation that existed was poor, and she thought he'd want to read the original alongside the translation and identify the errors. He spent 3 evenings on it. He found 7 errors and a mistranslation that had, he was fairly certain, propagated through 3 downstream clinical guides. He told her. She was delighted in the precise, quiet way. She was delighted by things, which manifested as a very slight brightening of her expression, and a particular quality of stillness that he had come to recognize as her version of satisfaction. He told her about Helen 6, eventually. Not all of it at once. It wasn't that kind of story, but in the way that information moves in close proximity over time, in the pieces that are relevant, and the ones that come loose on their own when the context is right. The 3rd time he mentioned the name of a doctor he'd trained under there. She asked who it was, and he explained, and that led to the case they'd worked together. And from there, the conversation found its own way through things he hadn't told anyone in the 2 years since he'd left. She told him about the Vithani home colony in kind, about the kind of work she'd left, and the particular exhaustion of being very good at something in a place where very good was the baseline and novelty was considered a risk. About her sister, who was still there, who did not understand why anyone would choose a joint colony station over a stable home. "What do you tell her?" he asked. "That I found something I was looking for," she said, and then, with the precision that he had come to expect and value, I told her that before I knew it was fully true. Now it is. He was quiet for a moment. "The calibration stylus," he said, "from the parts exchange on level 9. You recognized the model number from my equipment." "Yes." "You must have noted the model when you were in the dispensary, before the parts exchange." "Yes." He thought about this. about the particular quality of attention that involved noting the model number of a medical technician's scanner calibration stylus at some point during a soft tissue treatment, and then recognizing it at a parts exchange weeks later and thinking to pick it up, about what it meant to move through a space and carry the details of the people in it. I do the same thing, he said. I notice things about people and I keep them. I still have a note somewhere about what the Dravathi dockworker I treated the day you first came in was going to come back to check, whether his shoulder resolved. He paused. It did. He came in 3 weeks later for an unrelated thing and mentioned it. Did you ask? Yes. He came back, she said, because you had asked. She looked at him with the amber eyes. People come back to the people who remember. Is that what happened with you? She considered this with the same care she gave to engineering specifications, a real question deserving a real answer. I came back the first time because of the Kethsava custom, she said. I came back the second time because of the analgesic question, which was real and needed answering. I came back the third time because I had brought Reth Saul, my colleague, and that was practical. She paused. The fourth time, I came back because I wanted to. And after that? Every time after that, she said, I came back because I wanted to. He looked at her. The bench at level 3's junction was, at this point in the afternoon shift change, busier than it usually was, a Dravathi crew walking through, 2 Marin children with a guardian moving toward the residential access, and she was entirely still in the middle of the movement, as she tended to be, a fixed point. I'm glad you did, he said. She nodded once, the full nod, not the chin tilt. I know, she said. That is also part of why. There was an evening, 7 weeks after the first Kethsava, when he was working late on the index corrections from the Vathani text, and she appeared at his door at a time that was neither a shift window nor a scheduled thing, just the end of her working day, and stood at the threshold. I finished early, she said. He looked up from the tablet. The dispensary was quiet, no queue, no walk-ins, just the ambient hum of the station, and the lamp he kept on when he was working that gave the treatment bay a warmer light than the overhead panels. Come in, he said. She came in and sat on the treatment bench, not as a patient sits, but as a person sits in a space they are comfortable in, and she looked at the tablet he was working on. The index corrections. 3 more to go. May I? She gestured at the tablet. He handed it to her, and she read the open entry with the focused attention she brought to all text, and then handed it back and said, The second correction on that entry, the word you have as asterisk tensioning, the Vathani original is closer to asterisk engagement. The tissue is not tensing toward repair. It is engaging with the adjacent material. It is a more active word. He looked at it. He changed the word. Better, she said. They sat in the warm lamplight of the treatment bay while he finished the remaining entries, and she did not fill the silence with anything unnecessary but simply was there, and the quality of it, the simple fact of another person in the room while he worked, not performing company but just present, was something he had not known he had missed until it was there. When he finished and set the tablet down, she said, You haven't eaten since the food you had at the 1100 window. He blinked. How do you know that? You had a full patient queue from 1300. You did not have a gap until now. She looked at him with the matter-of-fact expression of someone reporting a maintenance status. The level 2 vendor closes at 2200. It is 2140. He looked at the time. He had not noticed. There's still time, she said. They went to level 2. The Earth Origin coffee vendor was closing, but the prepared food vendor next door was still open, and they ate at the small counter along the outer wall with the view of the corridor traffic thinning out as the late shift settled in. She had something from the Vathani menu that she told him, when he asked, was grain-based and savory, and one of the few things on the station that was made correctly for her palate. He had something that was described as a rice preparation and was close enough. Sithara, he said. She looked at him. I want to say something, he said. Say it. I'm glad you keep coming back, he said. I was glad before I read the guide. I was glad after. I want to make sure this is clear. I'm not welcoming it out of courtesy or because I don't know how to decline something. I'm welcoming it because I want you here. She looked at him for a long moment with the amber eyes in the low light of the late shift corridor. I know, she said. You are not a person who does things out of courtesy when he means otherwise. I would have known within the first 2 weeks. You were assessing. I am always assessing, she said. It is not a hostile act. It is how I know what is real. And what's real, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that you are someone I want to be near. That being near you has been, in the 8 months since I arrived on this station, the thing I have most consistently valued. She said it with the same precision she gave to everything, not dramatically, not tentatively, just as a true thing being reported accurately. And that I have not said this directly until now because she paused, ensuring I was certain. I am certain. He looked at her across the small counter, with the late shift corridor behind her, and the almost closed vendor stalls on either side. I'm certain too, he said. I've been certain for a while. I didn't have the words for it until recently. The guide gave you words. The guide gave me the Vathani words, he said. The feeling was already there. She looked at him with the warmth he knew now, the slight softening around the eyes, the settling quality. Good, she said. Good, he agreed. They finished eating. She walked with him back toward level 4. Her dormitory section was adjacent to the maintenance corridor on level 5, which was 1 floor up from his route, not on her way at all, and at the junction she stopped. Tomorrow, she said, 1100 again. 1100, he said. She gave him the chin tilt. He held her gaze for a moment, long enough to be a thing, and then she left toward the level 5 access, and he went toward the dispensary with the particular feeling of a person who has been, for a while, in exactly the right place. She came the next morning before 1100, which he had begun to expect, and she brought the Kethsava again, from level 3, correctly made, and set both cups on the treatment bench with the care she brought to all objects she handled, which was considerable. He was going to say something. He had a sentence in mind that was precise and honest, and that he thought she would receive the way she received everything, fully, without deflection, and he was going to say it when she looked at him with the amber eyes and said, First, I'm going to stay close to you for a long time. It was not a question. It was also not a demand. It was the most precisely accurate description of an intention he had ever heard delivered, and it arrived in the quiet directness that was entirely hers. He thought about the first day, when she had stood at the border of his threshold and hadn't quite decided. He thought about the instruction sheet she'd read with such care, about the Kethsava from the level 3 vendor who made it correctly, about the calibration stylus from the parts exchange, and the index corrections, and the 7 errors in the Vathani medical text, and 2140 on a late shift, and 20 minutes to the food vendor and the late shift corridor, and a sentence that was a true thing being reported accurately. I know, he said. I'm glad. She nodded once, the full nod, the one that meant the most, and lifted her cup. He lifted his. The bittersweet arrived 4 seconds later, unchanged, and the station moved around them in its ordinary way. A Dravathi rotation changing shift in the corridor outside, a Marin family heading toward the residential levels, the long ambient hum of Karthan Station keeping itself alive in the space between worlds. He had, 14 months ago, taken a contract for a walk-in dispensary because he wanted to do each thing well. He had not expected it to include this. He had not expected, from a soft tissue tier in an inner elbow held at 30 degrees of internal rotation, a woman who brought him correctly made Kethsava and noted model numbers, and told him whole answers because she preferred them, and sat in his treatment bay in lamplight while he finished index corrections and arrived at 1108 minutes before it because she had learned he arrived slightly early. But that was the thing about small acts done with care. You could not always predict what they evidenced, and you could not always predict who was watching.